Are you real?
Did you just ask me if I was real?
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and let's talk about the new anime series that just dropped on Netflix, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. So this is a new adaptation of the Scott Pilgrim graphic novels by Bryan Lee O'Malley, and this is made by ScienceSaru, the same animation studio that gave us Devilman Crybaby, Adventure Time, and an episode of the excellent Star Wars Visions. But of course, this is not the first time these comics have been adapted. The first time was in the kick-ass 2010 film Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, directed by Edgar Wright and starring Michael Cera.
Hi, Barbie.
Ahsoka's Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Steve Rogers himself Chris Evans, Succession's Kieran Culkin.
Look at you. You look like, you know, an actual human person.
Aubrey Plaza, Jason Schwartzman.
I made you into a hero. You made me into this.
And so many more. And they all came back on board for the anime.
Isn't that wild? The same guy playing two different versions of the same guy?
And I just gotta say, I am in lesbians with this show.
Did you say what now?
It's an inside joke, you wouldn't get it.
Oh, I see.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
This show is an absolute blast from start to finish, so we're going to break it down for all of you and discuss both the ending and the mid-credit scene that sets up a possible second season. But before we get started, there will be spoilers, not just for this show, but for the comics and the movie as well, so consider yourself warned.
Hey person, if I want to get into Scott Pilgrim, what's it about?
Sure thing, buddy. Well, the comics contain 6 volumes, the first 2 being Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Both the comics and the movie follow a 20-something-year-old slacker from Toronto named Scott Pilgrim who plays in a crappy band with his friends, lives with his snarky gay roommate, and is kind of dating a high schooler on the side.
Dating a high schooler person? This sounds disgusting. I don't want to hear any more about this.
Hold on, buddy, don't worry. I know how that sounds, but it doesn't go where you think it does. And besides, Scott gets called out for it constantly.
You're too good for him. Run.
Oh, good. See, you had me worried there. Could have been real gross.
So anyways, Scott soon starts seeing this girl on rollerblades in his dreams and finds out that she's Ramona Flowers, a delivery girl from America. The two of them start dating and everything seems fine until Scott finds out that in order to keep dating Ramona, he has to defeat each one of her 7 evil exes, with each being stronger than the one before.
Everybody got that?
Oh, now you got my attention.
Oh, dude, it is such a great series. Like, one of the exes is a vegan with psychic powers, another one's a ninja. It is so awesome. There's also so many great references to comics, manga, video games, and indie rock bands snuck in throughout the series. And through Scott's eyes, it all looks and feels like an old school beat-em-up video game. But besides that, it's also a super funny and very touching story with a great romance at the center of it. So while the movie is iconic, it actually makes sense to adapt Scott Pilgrim as an anime. Bryan Lee O'Malley was already a huge anime fan when he created the series, and his character design is intentionally anime inspired. But that's not all. The plot of Scott fighting Ramona's 7 evil exes feels in spirit with a lot of the shonen anime like Dragon Ball, Naruto, or One Piece, where our main hero has to go up against a constant stream of bad guys and personal challenges on their quest for greatness. And besides, there are things that animation is capable of doing that live action often just can't pull off.
And animation is a medium and not just a genre for kids.
That's right, buddy. High five. Being animated also lets the show go all out with its insane fight scenes, which as we know is a staple of anime, and Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is full of them.
Now person, does this anime have the exact same story as the comics and movie?
Well, not exactly.
Whatever do you mean?
Alright, so let me explain. The first episode starts off pretty much like the comics and movie, with Scott going about his precious little life.
He said it! He said it!
Playing in his crappy band, hanging out with his high school girlfriend Knives Chow.
Still gross.
Of course. And then he starts having dreams about Ramona, who he meets at a party and starts going out with. There are minor changes in the first episode from the comics and movie. Here, Ramona is a Netflix DVD delivery girl for a show on Netflix. Ramona doesn't offer Scott a bazillion kinds of T-minor stuff. Everything basically goes the same up until Scott's fight with Matthew Patel.
Reversal.
So, being the first of the evil exes, Matthew's probably the easiest one that Scott defeats in the series before he moves on to the other 6 in order to date Ramona. But here, we get the rug pulled out from under us when just as the fight begins, Matthew actually manages to kill Scott.
I won? I won!
What?
And we see coins that the characters give off whenever they're beaten.
Sweet. Coins.
But after almost everyone mourns his death, Ramona then has a premonition that Scott's not really dead in her dream.
He's alive!
So then she goes back to where Scott's band played at the Rocket and finds security footage of what actually happened.
Someone grabbed him. and pulled him into a portal.
And so, from episode 3 on, there's a mystery as to who took Scott, with Ramona investigating her exes to find out if any of them took him. And this allows the show to go in a completely different direction from the source material, but it works so well.
So the show is called Scott Pilgrim Takes Off because Scott literally takes off from the story?
Yeah, pretty much, but not totally focusing on Scott allows us to spend more time with other characters like Ramona, Kim Pine, young Neil, Wallace, and all the exes. We actually get to go deeper into Ramona's past relationships and see how she repairs them in some way. For instance, in the movie, we only briefly hear about Ramona and Roxy Richter's relationship.
I was just a little bi-curious.
Well, honey, I'm a little bi-curious.
But in the show, we not only hear Ramona and Roxy talk about their past during an incredible extended fight where they're transported into different movies, but we also see how and why Ramona broke things off as well. It lets us see her in a more complex light and the damage that she unintentionally caused to Roxy and how it made her angry and bitter over time.
So you left without a word? You made me feel like nothing!
Now besides Roxy, we also get to see the other exes in their personal lives and interacting with each other, something we never saw in the comics. In fact, Matthew even challenges Gideon to take over as leader of the exes and wins, getting not just that position, but all of Gideon's money, possessions, and power.
I got nothing, not a damn thing.
But more on Gideon in a bit. I just want to take a second and say that the show is not only hilarious, but you can actually see how much the show creators understand their fan base and keep the anime spirit with the older material. They even make a nod to this in the show.
From one creative to another, just know we're making every effort to treat the material with respect.
The comics are revered for their humor and 90s video game aesthetic. The anime show references to Legend of Zelda's Triforce, the Sonic series.
Nobody mentioned Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, it's not what it looks like.
And Metal Gear Solid.
That's their special little guy right there. The twins.
They include several nods to the live-action movie as well. Now in Toronto Wood, the movie is being shot by Edgar Wrong, a spoof of the director of the live-action film, Edgar Wright. We can hear a bit of the song Black Sheep from Clash of the Demon Head, one of the best musical numbers in the live-action movie. Young Neil can be seen wearing a Cronenberg for President t-shirt because co-creator of the show, Ben David Grabinski, is a big fan of filmmaker David Cronenberg and often references his works in his projects. Now when Todd runs into his trailer's bathroom to relieve himself, the same P-bar appears like when Scott takes a leak in the original movie. We hear the famous phrase,
Bread makes you fat.
Bread makes you fat?
when Knives and Steven are working on their musical.
Bread makes you fat.
Now, person, that sounds great and y'all, but just to go back to the show, does Scott actually come back?
Oh yeah, of course he does. So after Ramona plays detective for a few episodes, which she alluded to in the first episode by saying she's a big fan of Columbo,
I mostly watched older stuff when I was a kid. You know, Columbo reruns.
she and Scott's friends are shocked at the end of episode 6 when Scott himself magically reappears out of nowhere, and then he finally reveals who took him.
It was me. I did it.
Say what?
So in episode 7, To Scott, To Pilgrim, which is of course a spoof of Too Fast, Too Furious,
Yeah, bro, man, he like them apples.
we find out that Scott's future self kidnapped him and took him to the future to prevent him from fighting the exes and dating Ramona, because after they got married they started having issues, and older Scott saw it as the literal end of their relationship. And when we see this older Scott's rage, bitterness, and power in the season finale, it shows just how Scott could have ended up becoming the exact way as Ramona's other evil exes. Now the thing about Scott himself is that he's a dick. Well, actually,
He's an asshole.
Yeah, I could have guessed that from how he dates a high schooler and then cheats on her.
oh, for sure, but over the course of the comics and movies, he grows as a person, recognizes and apologizes for his flaws, and accepts responsibility in his relationship with Ramona. Aside from defeating Ramona's exes, this character growth has always been the main theme of the series, and seeing our Scott go up against a dark mirror reflection of himself is actually in line with the comics.
What do you mean?
So in the comics, there's a few occasions where Scott comes face to face with a version of himself called Nega Scott, who represents all of the bad and irresponsible things that Scott has done. And towards the end of the series, when Ramona briefly disappears and Scott feels directionless, Nega Scott attacks him. Nega Scott has the upper hand in this fight until Scott's encouraged by Kim to accept his faults and work towards being a better person. And then Nega Scott is absorbed back into Scott's body. And in a similar way, this older Scott, who felt like he was rejected by Ramona, serves to show how present-day Scott could end up if he wasn't responsible and couldn't maturely handle things. The final episode, titled The World vs. Scott Pilgrim, is a nod to this. The original comic and movie were titled Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, where Scott learned that he had to be a better person, whereas The World vs. Scott Pilgrim is the worst case scenario. And not only that, but when older Ramona helps out in the fight against older Scott, Ramona's once again confronted by the fact that she always runs out on her relationships when they're not working.
Run! Run away from from the thing that you love.
So, just like Scott in the comics, Ramona realizes her own faults and decides to stop running from herself and absorbs older Ramona into herself. Now, these story choices are very much in line with the themes of the original series, showing that just because present Scott and Ramona are flawed doesn't mean they will repeat the same mistakes as their future selves. If anything, they've learned from those around them and their future selves to become better people. And the show ends with Scott and Ramona together in a loving and confident relationship. Now, as for the mid-credit scene, let's go back to Gideon for just a second. Once he loses to Matthew for control of the X's, Gideon basically becomes a shell of who he was and he has nowhere to go. He runs into Julie Powers at her house and she recognizes him as her dorky high school classmate Gordon Goose, and they hook up. And at first it seems like Gordon has turned over a new leaf. He basically sits around on the couch watching anime. Who can't relate to that? But we see that his cunning and backstabbing attitude haven't really gone away, as he and Julie plan to bomb the stage during the musical in the finale, but they fail. And Matthew, sick of the stress from owning all of Gordon's possessions, gives them back to Gordon. And so the mid-credit scene shows Gordon and Julie sitting in Gordon's lair watching his screen, and they say this.
Time for the real game to begin.
The goose is loose. Honk honk fuckers.
So it's pretty clear that they plan to take out Scott and Ramona once and for all, and this could make for a fun second season. The thing is though that Bryan Lee O'Malley, Edgar Wright, and Netflix haven't announced a second season, and they initially didn't plan on one. But if they have a way to carry on this new and unique take on the world of Scott Pilgrim, then I think we can all agree that we would love to see it.
Me too, person. I'd be in Lesbians for the second season.
Hey, now you're getting it, buddy. High five. But I want to know what you guys thought of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. Did you like this new take on the series? Did you like the ending? And would you want to see a second season? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.